Hi, everybody. This is SIG Auth for March 21st, 2018. Today we have a pretty full schedule, so we're going to get going. First, we have a demo for some Kubernetes audit add-ons. So, do we have you here?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I'll stop sharing my screen so you can share yours. Does that sound right?
I will show my screen here.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Not sure you are how interested to this tool. This project supports isolated advanced audit for multi-tenants in Kubernetes cluster. Okay. It reads the audit events from Kubernetes webhook, and also it can read the events from far backend. Then split audit events to different directories according to the namespace of the audit event.
So the idea would be that when you receive an audit event, it will actually write and split out the many different audit events into different namespaces and subpaths for different tenants or different users.
Yeah. And currently it split audit events to according to a namespace with in this demo. And then the tenants can use their service accounts to read these audit events. Service account is required. This tool will verify the service account from the port and use a remote author, a remote subject access review to verify he can this service account can read allowed to read audit events in such a namespace or in cluster scope. That's what this tool do.
So if I have a particular service account, then I can read the actual events from my namespace?
Yes.
Awesome.
Are you giving the actual service account credential to the user? I'm kind of confused about like how that works.
Oh, this service account, we can use the service account from the pod. Otherwise, we create a service account will be okay, I think.
I guess like another way to ask the same question is there a way to distinguish like the kind of robot user delivering logs to the system and a human user accessing the logs in the system?
Currently, Azure we only support a service account. Azure user like users like a user who use kubectl that way is not supported now.
It looks like the authentication is actually specific to service accounts, as in it does its service
Yes.
account validation of the JWT.
Yes, currently it only support service account. And maybe just like this. This is a service account. I read from the port, and this tool just verify the service account and make sure he can only read his own audit event.
Awesome. Are there any other questions for this demo, about this demo?
So one can always read service the audit logs for their own account. It requires the remote authenticator to access a different namespace or basically more privilege.
Whoever is talking, you're very, very quiet right now.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
A little bit better.
Okay, I was just wondering if a service account can always access their own auditor, or like, and the remote authenticator is only required for accessing different namespaces, or if it has to go through the remote service, like either way.
Sorry, I can understand your question very well, because
I believe it has to go through this remote service. So this remote service runs, it stores logs somewhere, and then users can use a service account token against the remote service to access the logs.
Yeah. Yes, that's this tool do.
Cool, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome.
Oh,
well,
okay. Thanks for your time.
I'm going to steal the screen sharing back.
Okay.
I just have, I guess, I just wanted to mention, like, general comment for SIG Auth, like, maybe others can chime in if they agree or disagree, but it kind of feels like exporting the service account credential and giving it to a user is like a fairly different use case than what I think it's supposed to be used for, as opposed to, like, you know, if that was some external sort of service that was accessing the Kubernetes API, like, this feels like an anti-pattern to me, like where you can't differentiate between human did this thing or external system did this thing, that's going to cause pain kind of in writing access control and auditing and incident response in other areas. I don't know if we actually have any guidance that says anything like that. Maybe we should. But yeah, this kind of use of service account credentials makes me a little nervous.
It's at least a misnomer, because we have user accounts and service accounts. The times where a user should be assuming a service account role is probably only during debugging, in my personal opinion. And I think it's reasonable to export service account credentials for things like Jenkins that run outside the cluster. I would recommend that we don't use service account tokens as the credential format for that. But yeah, again, we do lack guidance right now, so it might be useful to clarify.
One relevant piece I wanted to mention is I had opened a bug a while ago to add, or kind of about this idea of being able to watch audit events as part of the Kubernetes API. One problem with the current approach to setting up these audit backends is you have to be an administrator to get access to, or you have to change the cluster setup basically to register any new audit kind of plugin sort of thing. And if there's a way to just directly watch those audit events without any history, because we don't want to be storing those necessarily. But this could potentially plug into that mechanism as well. I can add a link to the agenda later.
Yeah, that'd be great. It does seem very related to that issue. We're going to jump into designs of note now. Tim, do you want to talk about pod restriction? And I was wondering also if you just want to talk a little bit about policy in general while you're discussing that.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to present that pod restriction, or should I take the screen share?
I can do it if someone else can take notes.
Yeah, so this, I tagged this as RFC because I don't necessarily know that this is the full direction we want to go, but I wanted to sort of put this out to the community because I think there's a lot of sort of related efforts going on, and I'd like to see those kind of unify and at least have some common direction, if not merge everything into a single policy. But kind of at a high level, the observation was that there's a bunch of proposals out for limiting new pod fields in different ways. And these are currently being treated as kind of separate, independent policies, even though they're all doing a very similar, trying to accomplish a very similar thing of limiting what fields you're allowed to set on pod. So kind of like finer grained authorization of pod settings. And so at a high level, this proposal is to create a new policy object and associated admission controller, which would be responsible for limiting all pod fields. It doesn't necessarily need to do them all in the first iteration, but kind of if we want to add a new limitation on a new field, this is where it would go. Eric, if you could jump to the scope section, I think it's up at the top. Because this is such a big area of saying, we're going to be the limitation device for the entire pod spec, I wanted to just call out a few things that were out of scope. The defaulting, I think, is debatable, but I would rather see that handled by a separate mechanism, maybe pod preset, and the design goes into a few reasons why below. But also, I want to keep the logic in this simple and just be kind of straightforward, whitelist, blacklist, pattern matching kinds of restrictions. And if you want to do something more advanced that calls out to external systems or has various hooks and whatnot, then that can be a separate admission controller. So this is kind of just straight up, are you allowed to set the Boolean true here, and kind of pattern matching on strings and that sort of thing. Any questions so far, or I can talk about a few of the other design points. Okay, so, oh, go ahead.
I was going to sort of just bring a general comment up, and how would you see this related to something like the scheduling policy proposal that got added a couple days ago?
So I need to take a closer look at that. I started sketching out what the policy or the scheduling piece of this would look like, in limitations on the attaints and tolerations, and realized that those are pretty deeply nested structures. But the idea is that, or my thinking was that for basic kinds of, are you allowed to set a toleration that meets this kind of basic pattern matching approach, would be included in this policy. That lets you both have one place for setting that kind of policy and kind of have consistency around restricting scheduling decisions, but also by pairing it with all of the other restrictions, it lets you do more elaborate policies, like you're only allowed to schedule on this set of nodes if you meet these really stringent pod security requirements. Or if you want to run as privileged, then you have to use this set of nodes or have this anti-affinity or various things like that. And yeah, as I call out, like this API ends up being quite large, but I sort of think that this is the direction that we're going in anyway. It's just right now our policies are spread out across many different APIs instead of consolidated into one mechanism. So just a couple of the other high-level design points I wanted to mention. After looking at the different ways of binding policy and authorizing use of policy, I feel pretty strongly that the namespace level is the right level to enforce these things. I go into above in the proposal a few of the reasons why our other approaches don't quite work. But since creation of an object is something that happens on a namespace, then I think that's where policy should be tied to. So that's one of the high level or kind of key design points here, is that you have a policy and you bind it to a set of namespaces through either just a list of namespace names or a selector. And then the other important piece to call out is how policies are composed. So if you have multiple pod restrictions that apply to the same namespace, how are those restrictions resolved? And kind of the two basic approaches are an intersection approach, which means that you must conform to every one of the policies, or more of a union approach, which is what the direction that pod security policy takes it, and that is that if you meet the requirements of any policy, you're allowed. And the big advantage of the intersection approach is policies can be composed. So for instance, instead of having one mega policy or one mega restriction for all of the different things you want to restrict, you can have your volume restrictions in one policy, and your pod security policy restrictions in another one, and your scheduling restrictions in another one. Another point that was brought up is you could have kind of your generic, really portable restrictions in one object, and then the more kind of deployment-specific pieces in another one. And by applying those both to the same namespace, you end up with kind of a composed policy. The problem with this approach is if you want to have a namespace that's open, for instance, Kube system needs to be able to run privileged pods. The only way to do that is for every single one of the pod restrictions to say in your namespace selector, like exclude Kube system, basically, which isn't a great experience. And so my idea here, which I'm definitely open to feedback on this, was kind of to draw inspiration from kind of firewall design and say, you sort of have these rules that lock down the cluster, but then you can also have rules that open it back up. And so there's this binding mode except, which says basically, if this pod restriction is running in the accept mode and you meet all of its requirements, then you're allowed. And so this is the example that's all the way at the very bottom. where you could have a number of really restrictive policies that apply to the entire cluster, and then just have this one little restriction in running in allow mode that only applies to kube system, and can have a small set of requirements and say basically everything in kube system can run as whatever you need the add-ons to run as. So that's kind of the high level points. I'll let folks read through the proposal if they're interested for more details. One other point I wanted to just throw out is, well, two questions actually I left on the description of the PR. One is this has a lot of overlap with another policy proposal by the policy working group, and also some overlap with the open policy agent admission control work. And so I kind of have a question of whether we even want to pursue these sort of first-class baked-in policies, or if we just want to defer to that kind of more abstracted open policy agent type thing. And then the other point is just that I don't actually have the bandwidth to implement this. And so my hope is that if this is something that as a community we want to pursue this idea, that maybe we can merge some of the other efforts, for instance, the ones that are going into the scheduling work, into building out this more high-level abstracted piece. So, any questions or comments on that?
I guess the only kind of the first thing that jumps to my mind is around like pod portability. So we definitely saw with some of the existing admission plugins around scheduling, especially, that different fields on pods like default different ways. So like a pod that doesn't declare any node selector can be scheduled anywhere in the cluster, right? Like it expresses no opinion, and the scheduler is free to put it anywhere. And so to make that pod safe, you might want to require it to like select non-master nodes. Whereas the tolerations on a pod, like a pod that has no tolerations, you can deny by default and like say you can't tolerate anything, and that way any node that is tainted in any way, you're not going to be able to go onto. And a pod that wants to opt into different taints would have to do that, and you could kind of whitelist those. And so if this is saying that we're not going to do any defaulting, I'm trying to understand how that, if someone wants to require pods to be steered to non-master nodes, and so they want to force a selector onto pods, would they write a restriction in this policy and then combine that with a defaulting thing that is separate, that would put that onto sort of pods that were written without any idea that they were going to be deployed into this restrictive cluster? How?
Yeah, so the kind of the approach there that I was proposing is you would have this restriction that applies cluster wide that says, you know, pods cannot be scheduled on the master. And then if you wanted to open up a specific namespace to, for instance, say you can schedule on the master if you have permission to create pods in this namespace and they're conforming to these additional requirements. And then to answer the defaulting piece, I'd like to see that handled through something like pod preset. So you might have the pod restriction controller running with this restriction that you can't schedule on the master node, and then the pod preset to automatically inject that that requirement that you, I guess that would be a node selector or something, would inject the rule that says that's required to meet that pod restriction, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Just having worked with the existing admission plugins, like having the thing that is doing the enforcing and the thing that is going to force compliance with it close and driven by the same data has its advantages. Instead of it being two sort of different components, one of which is, as soon as you turn it on, gonna break every, plain deployment out there, and then you have to come along with a separate component that's gonna independently, driven by different data and different config, sort of force those values in to make it compliant with the policy. I'm just trying to envision kind of how that would be managed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think it works. I think it works well when you're talking about like one field. But I agree that breaks down when you then say, all right, well, we have 25 different aspects we want to control. So do we have 25 happy little individual components that each manage their own field in a nice way, but then are a nightmare to make work together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm kind of wondering if this can sort of be handled through just like a good administrative workflow. For instance, keeping your pod preset and associated pod restriction in a single file that you kubectl apply.
I'd also, just in the sake of time, because we have a couple other items, would be okay if we move more of this conversation to the pull request.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. Did we also tag in the SIG scheduling folks? I know they had just opened up the scheduling policy poll. It'd be good to get this in front of as many folks as possible.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I'm also going to bring this to the policy working group meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
I'm happy to present at SIG scheduling as well.
Mike, I think this is your entry.
Yeah, this has been floundering for a couple releases. It has been suggested in the past to drop the fixing the IP self-reporting and to only focus on taints and labels self-reporting. So the update to this drops all the IP stuff. I have it in a diff that I plan to introduce once this proposal is merged or agreed upon. It also fixes some of the last review comments, such as it clarifies some of the configuration around whitelisting certain labels and taints to be self-reported by the kubelet, and it discusses how we can remove the self-deletion permission from the node on the majority of Kubernetes deployments that don't actually use that permission. So I just wanted to notify you guys that this has been in fact updated. I don't have much more to say about it, but I will be probably adding this as an agenda item on the next SIG node meeting, because it is a SIG node proposal. So that meeting is next Tuesday at 10 a.m. So does anybody have questions?
No, thanks for driving this.
Yeah, sure.
We're really interested in seeing this happen.
Yeah, we are too. It's been too long.
Great.
Awesome. Paris, are you here?
I am. Sorry, I was on mute. Apologize.
Should I click on this, or do you want to share it yourself?
If you could click on it, that would be awesome.
Maybe you should share it.
Yeah, definitely. Hold on one sec. Let me get it up on my screen here. All right. Everybody see this big block of text?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, first things first. Hi, everyone. I am a co-chair of the Special Interest Group for Contributor Experience. we decided to do a roadshow of sorts. There are 37 SIGs and working groups at this point in time, and it is very hard for us to communicate out what we are doing, and all of you are contributors, awesome contributors to say the least. So we want to make sure that we do this on a regular basis, regular meaning at least quarterly. This is a rather long one because it's our first one and we've been doing a lot of work. So it's important for us to just get out and introduce ourselves and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to go through this entire block of text. I'm going to leave it with you. A lot of this we are asking for feedback on, so that's why I'm not going to go through a lot of it and get feedback right now. But if we have time, of course, let's take the feedback now. First things first, we are trying very hard and diligently to make our automation and workflow and process for contributors the same experience across repos so that we can A, have a single point of truth, and B, so we can correct a lot of the feedback that we get from new and current contributors alike, which is when switching repos, things mean different things, or workflows are different, or people's roles are different, etc. So we've been working very diligently on things like defining bot commands, defining labels, both of which have links inside of this document for your review. What we really want to know with a lot of these things is A, how you're using them, B, are you using them, and C, like what the pros and cons for you to be using these things are. I'll just give a quick highlight example is the help wanted label. A lot of new contributors complain about this label because they feel like all of the help wanted issues are generated towards people who are already contributing to the project, and it's hard for them to jump in. And right now we don't use a good first time issue or for new contributor issue or label across the board. Some people are using it, some people aren't using it. So it's like, how can we get better in this area? In the same kind of breath, issue triage and issue management guidelines, we have had some of our contributors work on this and apply it to Kubernetes as well as Kubernetes community, and we want your feedback on it. We want to know if we should apply these guidelines across all Kubernetes repos for just better issue triage management. Again, the labels are coming up here. Labels are also something that are important to DevStats. If you do not know what DevStats is, it's CNCF's product for how we're collecting metrics and things like that across the project. So right now we're spending a lot of time. We have a new product owner for this who is going to be really going to a lot of SIGs and asking them, what do you want to know about this project that's important to you from a metric standpoint? How can metrics guide what you're doing for SLAs, SLOs, etc. So getting the labeling right and the meanings right is important for that, because we're going to be pulling some stats based off of labels. So if we're not using the labels correctly across the board or mean the same things, then the stats could look different or mean different things. Next, how do you find out about these changes? And this is, again, one of the main reasons why we're doing these roadshows, is because we are turning things on and off in certain repos, and people have said that we aren't necessarily communicating these changes appropriately. So we laid out in our charter how we're actually going to be communicating these changes go forward. So for you all who are interested in these changes, we will lazy consensus out these changes with a time box of at least 72 hours to the following mailing lists with a GitHub issue link and the subject of notice. We're going to be emailing that to contributor experience, the SIG lead distro, as well as Kubernetes dev email distro. And then we'll also be doing community meeting Thursday announcements as well. So that's kind of how we're going to be proceeding go forward with these changes. So I'll take a breath now. Does anybody have any quick questions or concerns about automation workflow process across repos and why we're doing this? Cool.
I'll just say I'm disappointed every time I go to some random repo and try to talk to a bot and nothing happens. So I like seeing these tools come to more repos and be more consistent.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, so consistency is definitely a big keyword for contributor experience this year. And I know that that has pros and cons. I know there's certain repos out there that do things one way and like to do things one way, or think that, it has advantages. So we're trying to work through those and trying to get everybody on the same page. So I did say the charter word above. The steering committee has released their charter info. I have not checked on SIG Auth. I don't know if I know Eric's on, but if A, you need help with your charter, B, if you need any advice, etc., we're here for you. We can help you out with those things. We just did ours, but I'm actually about to make changes to it today because we've recently changed the SIG lead title to chair. As well as adopted the technical lead guidance that the steering committee has enforced or recommended rather. And then also we've adopted the sub-project owners as well. So that change will be coming either today or tomorrow. And we also created a project markdown file too, so everybody can know what we're working on, why we're working on it, and when it's getting delivered. We know that this isn't a great project management tool, but it works for us at this point in time so that we can just get our heads cleared. We also have a new version of the contributor guide. We would love for you to review and make comments to it. The developer guide is also on its way too. We have officially broken ground on that work. For both of these things, we would love for you to poke holes, especially the developer guide right now, because we do know that there are different ways for doing things in certain groups, and this is actually the place to talk about that, especially API conventions, things like that. Again, please poke holes at these things. We want a kind of a single point of truth. And one of the things that we are looking forward to doing is we're going to create a contributor site. It'll be something along the lines of contributors.kubernetes.io, and all of these documents will be surfaced there instead of GitHub, which is a major activity that's underway right now. Also, mentoring, we have come up, and this is contributor mentoring as well, not user mentoring. We've come up with several different strategies that really tackle time. We hear that no one has time to do a lot of traditional one-on-one mentoring, and that's totally fine. But we've come up with other ways for you to actively contribute in this area. One of them is through Mentors on Demand. This is like a 1 hour Ask Me Anything live streamed YouTube session with 5 to 6 contributors monthly. So you'll get on as a mentor and answer random questions like what's your favorite color to what the heck is end-to-end testing here? Why are my tests flaking? And why are you into Kubernetes open source? So it's really awesome, very quick way for you to get involved and to help someone's life a little easier instead of to read the damn docs, as we call it. Also Outreachy, we just completed our Outreachy pilot and it went well. We have 2 women who are now contributing to the project as active contributors for CLI, and we actually pay them a stipend through Outreachy, and Google and CNCF had that covered last time, and it is a semester-based program. This next semester has already started, but if your crew is interested in getting into Outreachy for the fall winter, let me know and I can tell you how to do that. Group mentoring is my favorite right now because group mentoring is something that open source is not familiar with. And I'm trying to socialize that and see if we can make that a thing. Group mentoring is an awesome way to get multiple people up to speed using one mentor. So it's a scalable program, but it's a self-paced deal, and we go based off of the community membership guidelines. Right now we're running a test cohort for KubeADM, COPS, and also Workloads API, where they have 4-to-1 mentors. We give them a private Slack channel, and we give them workshops and time with maintainers. And it would be awesome to see SIG Auth involved in this as well. So for instance, if you need more approvers, we can do like 4 reviewers to 1 mentor. And the mentor does not need to be a lead, a chair, or anything like that. The person just needs to be in good standing with your group and be at least the level that these people want to get into. and we just self-pace them through. Right now, the 10 individuals that we have, at least 4 of them are going to be going into owner's files after their 3-month period, which ends at this month. So it's very cool, very different. And then we're also proposing a buddy program, which is very similar to one-on-one mentoring. And that is, except very different because it's a one-time, one-shot deal for 1 hour. So you can either pair program with the person, do code reviews with the person, ask them anything they want, and anything that you think you need to get up to speed in that certain area. Hoping to go live with at least a test for this in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So the TLDR for mentoring is, if you're interested, I'd love to get involved and see where your mentoring needs are, so we can talk offline about that. And then last item here, that's kind of the major item, is Slack. I know lately it has been a topic of heated discussion as to whether or not we should be switching providers. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but I do want to tell you some stats. We onboarded 2,000 new people in the last 30 days via Slack. This is a huge deal for us. We now have 33,000 people on Slack with 160 channels. It's a huge beast for us, and I thought the best way for us to handle this is to onboard some of those important documents that you keep in GitHub as pinned notes, things like your charter, your meeting notes, your agenda, if you don't already have this. We also have set up some Slack guidelines, so feel free to view those, and also join the Slack admins channel if you need anything that's new as well. We're always looking for volunteers for user office hours. That happens actually today in, I think, an hour or 2. These are talking to users, very similar to Meet Our Contributors kind of format. If you've not been involved, people ask questions in Slack and Twitter, and contributors answer them from a user perspective. And that is it for me. Love, like I said, you don't have to give any feedback now, but we would love to hear feedback either on our mailing list, via Slack channel, a pigeon carrier, owl, doesn't matter. Just get us feedback on how we can help you better shape your contributor experience. Awesome.
Awesome. Do we have any specific feedback or questions for Paris while we have her? Awesome. Well, Paris, thanks a bunch for all your work on this. I know that you do a lot of things that sort of behind the scene keep us all running, so just appreciate it.
Sure.
Cool. Share my screen again. So I put a little item on here that's kind of within this theme. Over the 1.11 release cycle, a few of us would like to start seeing us more formally tracking the work that we're doing. This came up with trying to talk a little bit about this new sub-projects thing that's coming out through some of the defining of what SIGs do. Every SIG now has a list of sub-projects. Whether or not that fits in perfectly with the kinds of work that we all do on a release-to-release basis, that's still sort of maybe up for debate, but I think defining more of what we do and trying to articulate the things to be done is something that we could do a much better job of. Over the 1.10 release cycle, and particularly as we hit the release, it was pretty unclear about not just maybe the state of particular features, so whether they were alpha, beta, stable. I know one of them might have snuck into a blog post in a state that it wasn't. But importantly, we want to just do a better job of tracking what work there is to do for individual features and what work there needs to be done. So a few of us have started to sort of put together a document describing more of the many stuff that SIG Auth does, the things that need to be done, the things that we've wanted to do but haven't been able to do. So I'll be sending out this document at some point between now and the next release or the next SIG Auth meeting. But importantly, I think one thing we do want feedback is determining how everyone in this group wants to start tracking their work. So if you haven't seen it, for some of the, for every release for the advanced auditing feature, Mick puts together this sort of very detailed bullet points of exactly what issues there are to work on, who owns them, what work there is to do. And this not only just is a very good thing for tracking this work, it's very helpful for someone looking at advanced auditing and trying to determine how much of it is done, what are the criteria for it to go to stable, or so on and so forth. And it also is a good opportunity for us to sort of acknowledge the work that our many contributors do. So the sort of thought that I want to leave with everyone here is, would we be interested in opening one of these for more of our features? So particularly, this would be something like the external client Go credential providers would create one of these for 111, describing the work that needs to be done and who owns it, and importantly, which ones aren't owned and who can step on and take over different issues. So that's sort of a little bit of a rambling. I will have more formalized sort of proposal at some point, but wanted to get initial feedback from anybody who's interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, umbrella issues, sort of hubs that everything related to a feature mentions or references or links to, and so you can get an at-a-glance view of what's going on in a release, is essential. Especially if, I think what happens a lot is something gets mentioned early on in a release and 5 people say, oh yeah, we're really interested in that. And then the one person who was planning to work on it gets busy and no one realizes that it didn't actually have any other owners. And then we get to the end of the release and we say, oh, well, maybe next release. So sorry, Mike, 911 is the poster child for that. So hopefully this can identify better, like here's what we wanted to get done on this, and make it clearer earlier when a feature that a lot of people actually do care about is at risk and could use other people jumping in on.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm also a big fan of those umbrella bugs for auditing. One thing that those do, which is different from some of our other kind of feature tracking umbrella issues, is aligning the work with releases instead of with kind of feature milestones. So for instance, in this one, you see it's for the 111 release, not for, even though graduating the API to stable is like one of the targets, this isn't the like work to go to stable. And the reason I like that is I think that, you know, the work to go to stable, the work to go to beta, if it spans multiple releases, those tend to get stale and it's a little hard to tell what is actually going into a specific Kubernetes release. So this makes it really easy to track the release and the progress, the progress, the status for aligned with Kubernetes releases, at least until we have feature branches, if that ever comes.
Yeah. And presumably there are pointers sort of to the previous releases work, and then whatever doesn't make it in, or you know, things that get continued to the next release get copied or moved into the next one. And so there's a chain, like you can track a feature through releases pretty easily if we do this like consistently.
Okay, awesome. I'll be sending out that document sometime later this week, and hopefully we can sort of use this as part of our 111 planning, which we should probably start doing next SIG Auth meeting. So appreciate everyone's feedback on this. Do we have any other things we want to discuss over the last 8 minutes that we have, or? Awesome. Well, I think we'll call it there and see everyone in 2 weeks. Thanks for your time.